Thanks for coming today. I hope you guys have gotten some usefulness out of the previous speakers. I'd like to start off by telling you a story. In September of 2011, 3 Air Force officers went to Bagram Air Force Base to do deployment with an F-15 squadron. In some of their off time, they elected to go to the bazaar and met a young Afghan who was an entrepreneur there named Wasil. And talking with him, they came to understand that he was also an economics student studying at a local Afghan university, and he would travel an hour to get there and wait an hour in line and then sell his wares to the Americans. They also discovered that his mom was creating a non-profit organization that basically brought Afghan widows into the local economy by creating silk scarves. And in talking to Wasil, they realized that one of the biggest concerns on the mind of Afghans was, what does the future of Afghanistan hold, particularly when the U.S. and the coalition forces leave? And in doing this, they realized that a lot of the funding that had been funneled into the economy there would soon be gone. And so they elected to create a non-profit organization outside the military structure to help support these Afghan widows, and they called it Flying Scars. After a few months of working through paperwork with the IRS, the Import-Export Bank, and things like this, they finally got it off the ground, and right now they're employing over 300 Afghan women. So these are young officers still within the military program who are taking their own initiative to make change in a culture where they see change be made. So today we talked a lot about how we can do innovation within the military, but I'm here to talk a little bit about how we can utilize the skills that we have learned in the military and take this to the next level. How can we find out new technologies, new innovations outside the military and hopefully integrate some of these ideas here? So to define the problem, in a lot of my discussions over the past couple months, since my Small War Journal article went out, I've realized that there's a sense that established institutions are not able to keep up with the pace of technological change, can't keep up with the pace of information and the pace of ideas being disseminated. The velocity of ideas is accelerating, and some of our systems aren't able to adapt to that. Secondly, the military used to drive innovation. So back in the 1950s and 60s, when Silicon Valley was first being set up, the military actually provided a lot of funding for those firms. And those firms evolved into more consumer-based companies, and now they obviously run on their own, and the military is kind of falling behind in terms of that acquisition. So we as a military have to adapt to this changing reality. We will be having to use more off-the-shelf technologies and adapting to what the culture and society around us is dictating as opposed to us dictating the realities. Next is the 1950s promotion and career management model. Basically, everything that we're structured around is a 20-year system to get us from commanding officer for an officer, or to get you to chief if you're an enlisted personnel. This doesn't take into account a lot of variations that may be useful to us, such as going for 2 or 3 years to the civilian sector, coming back into the military, taking advantage of some of the other opportunities that are out there, or in only very few cases are people allowed to go to extended graduate education programs in the civilian world. We need to kind of start adapting our career models to identify outlying talent. Next, procurement is running amok. We have systems, and I found this recently in our squad, we bought 8 VCR recorders that cost $15,000. This is also indicative at large. So the Joint Strike Fighter project we'll talk to a little bit later is over $350 billion, and it's taken us 20 years to procure it. Now, maybe a system that we need, and I don't necessarily dispute that, but the pace of change in terms of the threats we're facing are not being kept up with our acquisition programs. And finally, an age of austerity is about to hit. We need to think smarter about how we're going to develop some of these systems. Next slide, please. So as we get on in the next couple of years, we're obviously going to hit some budget cuts, and we're going to have to think about innovation. We've talked a lot about innovation, so we kind of understand what innovation is. And innovation, in the sense we've talked about, is very tech-centric. But innovation goes beyond tech itself. It goes into ways of thinking. It goes into how we devise systems. There's another form of innovation called disruptive innovation. I'd like to get some audience participation. And so since you're in the front row, petty officer, when you hear the word disruption, what is the first thing that comes to mind? So one phrase. So she said disruption means chaos. Admiral, when you hear the term disruption, what does it mean to you? Just a quick phrase.
Change.
So Admiral said change. So chaos, change, things like that. The term, when I use disruptive in terms of disruptive thinkers or disruptive innovation, I don't mean like Occupy Wall Street. Let's overthrow the system. Let's create chaos. Let's be problematic for the people in charge. What I'm talking about is Clay Christensen's definition of disruption, the innovator's dilemma. And basically what disruptive innovation is an innovation that's trying to change the marketplace. It's a new technology or a new idea that is intended to adapt to a new market. And eventually that new idea ends up migrating to an old market. So for instance, Netflix is a huge disruption to the videotape industry. So Blockbuster was doing well up until about 5 years ago. Netflix comes along with this new model. They're grabbing some people who are more tech-centric, and all of a sudden Blockbuster goes bankrupt, and Netflix is still running strong, although with recent indications they're almost being disrupted themselves. When we're talking about disruption, we're talking not about causing chaos, but instead causing needed change. And this disruptive innovation can be translated into disruptive thinking as well. And so this is a new way of thinking about the world around us. Not using the old metrics and the old philosophies, but kind of using ideas that come together and hopefully create a better system. It's my belief that those who are able to create connections across disparate fields will hold the keys to the future. Those who can make connections where connections were not previously made will be the ones who will be able to adapt the quickest and thrive most in this information age. Slide, please. Next slide. So in his talk, Lieutenant Commander Armstrong talked about Imagine by Jonah Lehrer, and Jonah talks about this concept called conceptual blending. So what conceptual blending is taking a couple different professions and utilizing the skills and the knowledge base within them to come to a good solution. And the example he gives is one I love. So you have a cancer researcher, and he's trying to figure out how to attack a certain tumor. And he knows that if he directs a beam of radiation at this tumor, it will kill the tumor. But at the full strength beam of energy, it will also kill the surrounding tissue. So the question is, how do you kill the tumor without killing the surrounding tissue? And in experiments, only about 30% of people can come up with the answer. So what the experimenters do next is they then present them with another problem. They say, there's a military commander. His job is to attack a circular structure, so like a castle. And if he goes straight up the middle in a road that's already developed into the castle, his force will be wiped out because then he can concentrate his fire. So what's the solution to this? And all of us in the military, we understand maneuver warfare. Well, let's put our forces up and let's surround the forest and come at it from all different angles, confuse the enemy, and basically take it over in mass from different areas. Well, as soon as this story is told to these people in the room, they suddenly click as to what the answer is to the first problem. The answer is basically have 10 separate beams at 10% of the initial release of energy that go into a concentrated area on the tumor that equals 100% of the tumor, but the surrounding tissue is not killed. And when the people understand this, 70% of the people get this answer right. So this is a very basic understanding of conceptual blending, taking one thing that's known from one profession and translating it to another. So what are some examples that we can think of here in the military? So one we talked about was the iPad, so the combat iPad. So taking technology that was basically for hikers in the middle of the wilderness and integrating that into close air support. The next one is one I'm especially fond of. In our group, Disruptive Thinkers, we have a very forward-thinking architect. He knows nothing about the military, but he loves to take part in these prizes. And one prize he's taking part in is called One Prize. And the goal this year is to create a solution or design some city structure that will help to take a blighted area and make it into a thriving area. So he got 3 of us together, Mike Crispin, who was on that iPad project, myself, and a Navy SEAL friend of mine. We just sat down for an hour and talked. What are some solutions we can come up with? How can we integrate the military into this? One of the solutions we thought of was, well, we have this whole cadre of military officers and enlisted people who had just come back from Afghanistan and Iraq. And while they were doing combat operations, one of their main goals has been to rebuild a society, rebuild blighted areas, develop infrastructure, take money, translate that into education. What if we transferred those skills and created like a work corps for blighted areas in America? You know, maybe the Central Valley of California, or Detroit, or Cleveland, or areas that really have seen some pretty significant hits. How can we take some of those lessons learned and integrate them into what we're doing today? Secondly, is the hangar of the future. So when Pixar decided to rebuild their building about 10 years ago, Steve Jobs came in and completely took over the project and wanted a very collaborative workspace. And what they built was a circular structure that was a very open floor plan. Basically, the bathrooms were in the center of the structure, and that forced everybody to come to those bathrooms together. And in that contact, they saw each other almost constantly during the day. They'd have random exchanges. They'd talk between each other. One of the problems I see in naval aviation is we have this little 2-floor structure. On the top floor are the operators, on the bottom floor are the maintainers. And there's always this conflict between operators and maintainers. And while some of the officers go down there and they have divisions, and a lot of them are very good with interacting with enlisted personnel, there's still a huge divide. And this might not work, but David and I, the architect, are working on to figure out what the hangar of the future will look like to be more collaborative. What if we created a 1-floor circular space that would allow maintainers, operators to interact on a daily basis? And maybe it wouldn't work, but it's thinking about outside the box and taking some concepts that we've learned from other areas and applying them. And finally, ROTC. So one of my most valuable experiences was going to a civilian college for undergrad. And what it allowed me to do was interact with people who I didn't normally associate with. So now I have friends who are architects and lawyers and doctors, and I'm still keeping in touch with them. And they have 10 to 12 years of experience in different fields. While we don't necessarily understand each other on a one-to-one level in terms of our daily profession, we can glean understanding from each other and hopefully pick aspects that are useful to us from their particular fields. So some real-world uses of this are incentive. Imagine also talks about this. It was basically created about 5 to 7 years ago to solve problems in the chemistry field. But what they found is they put these problems up. The people who are best able to solve these problems are not chemists, but those who are on the edge of chemistry, so physicists and biologists, who might have some latent understanding that can solve these very difficult problems. They're taking other applications and applying them to their current uses. 3M does this as well. Every quarter they bring all their best ideas together, basically bring all their engineers together, they talk about these ideas, and most of the time people can't really make a connection, but sometimes there's that aha moment where they say, this guy creating this tape is going to have a direct effect on how I'm creating this new marker or this new object in 3M. Next slide, please. So as we reach this age of austerity, we find that there's a lot of talk about the downturn and a lot of pessimism and force structure reductions and people being released from service and what do we do about maintenance and how do we figure out what things we want to buy. Well, I see this as a real opportunity because one, we're coming off a war. And so when we come off a war, we usually kind of come back to garrison, we relax, we kind of let the paper pushers take over. You know, war fighting acumen isn't necessarily as important as it once was. But what we should do is take advantage of this downtime, if you will, take advantage of the austerity measures we're going to have to take. We can start focusing on the elements that are really important. We can make sure that we're really allowing risk takers to take risks. And we can afford to fail now. We can afford to take risks and fail and hopefully promote those risk takers. So while we're not necessarily creating widgets, we are creating future innovators. And if those innovators are allowed to fail now and fostered, when it comes time for the next war to come up, they'll be able to come with better solutions and hopefully integrate those solutions into whatever combat situation they find themselves in. Next, we have to remember that innovation is a collaborative process. We have to capture outliers and put them to good use. So the military, in my opinion, does a very good job of the middle 80% they can manage. It's the bottom 10% they can easily get rid of, but the top 10% that maybe are a little bit outside their field of knowledge, that kind of have some really crazy ideas that sometimes we keep down until they've met certain wickets. You know, you got to be a chief for X number of years to be a senior chief. You have to be a lieutenant before you can be a lieutenant commander. I think we should rethink about some of these systems and try to identify talent and ability as opposed to just grouping people into year groups.